All right, welcome. Today we're going to dive deep into the hidden science that pretty much runs our entire lives, the power of habit. We're going to crack the code on why we do the things we do, and even more important, how we can actually change them. So let's jump right in.
So let me just ask you something. Think about your day so far. How many of the things you did were actually conscious, deliberate choices? You probably think, yeah, most of them. But, the science tells a completely different story.
Research suggests that a staggering 40%, that's almost half, of the actions we take every single day aren't actual decisions. Nope, they're habits. They are these little automated routines that our brains just run in the background without us even realizing it. We're basically on autopilot for half of our waking lives. Wild, right?
So if we are on autopilot so much of the time, how does that even work? Well, it turns out there's a kind of hidden code, a fundamental blueprint that all of our habits follow. Let's take a closer look at what that is.
Okay, so at the very core of every single habit, the good, the bad, all of them, is this simple but incredibly powerful pattern. It's called the habit loop. You can think of it as the basic operating system our brain uses to automate our behavior.
This loop has three basic parts. First, you've got a cue. That's the trigger that tells your brain, hey, time to go into auto mode. It could be a time of day, a place you're in, even an emotion you're feeling. Next up is the routine, which is the behavior itself, the thing you actually do. And finally, you get the reward. That's the good stuff, the little bit of positive feedback that tells your brain, hey, this whole loop, totally worth remembering. So it's cue, routine, reward. Simple enough, right?
Well, almost. It turns out this loop needs a little something extra to really get fired up. The real engine that makes the habit loop spin is craving. See, as your brain starts to connect the cue with that awesome reward, it begins to anticipate it, creating this really powerful neurological desire.
And this isn't just theory. It's been used in the real world in a huge way. You're not going to believe this, but back in the early 20th century, most Americans didn't even brush their teeth. It just wasn't a thing. Then, Pepsodent toothpaste came along and added ingredients that created a cool tingling feeling. All of a sudden, people started to crave that tingle. They started to equate that feeling with being clean. And just like that, brushing your teeth became a national habit. Pepsodent literally manufactured a craving.
So here's where it gets really, really cool. If we can understand this code, that means we can also learn to hack it. This is where the power shifts back to us, because this whole framework gives us the tools we need to start consciously changing our own behaviors.
So how do you actually do it? Well, the single most effective way to redesign a habit is something called the golden rule. And it's so powerful because it's just so simple.
Here's the rule. You don't try to just stop a bad habit cold. That almost never works. Instead, you keep the cue the same and you keep the reward the same. The only thing you do is intentionally swap out the routine. You're essentially giving your brain the exact same payoff it's craving, just through a better, more constructive action. And this works, big time. Just look at Coach Tony Dungy in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. His players had all these bad habits of overthinking and hesitating on the field. So what'd he do? He didn't change the cues, how the other team was lining up, and he didn't change the reward they all wanted, which was winning. He just gave them a new, much simpler routine to run automatically. And the result? They became a Super Bowl winning team.
Now, it turns out that some habits are way more important than others. They're called keystone habits. And these are the ones that can create this massive positive ripple effect through your entire life.
A keystone habit is basically a central behavior that once you change it, it starts this incredible chain reaction. It starts transforming other, totally unrelated patterns in your life. It's not about changing everything at once. It's about finding that one domino that's going to knock over all the others.
And what's the most important keystone habit of them all? You guessed it, willpower. But we tend to think about it all wrong. We think it's some kind of skill you're either born with or you're not. But the research is really clear. Willpower is much more like a muscle. And just like any muscle, it gets tired if you overuse it.
There's this famous experiment that shows this perfectly. They had two groups of students. One group had to sit in a room and resist the urge to eat these amazing, freshly baked cookies. The other group didn't have to resist anything. Afterwards, they gave both groups a really difficult puzzle to solve. The students who had used up all their mental energy fighting off the cookies, they gave up on the puzzle way faster. Their willpower muscle was just spent.
So what are some of these keystone habits in our own lives? Well, they can be really simple things, like daily exercise, which studies show leads to eating better and being more productive at work. Or even just making your bed every morning. That one little act correlates with better personal finance habits and a greater sense of well-being. Focusing on just one of these can kickstart that powerful chain reaction.
Now, what's really mind-blowing is that these principles don't just apply to us as individuals. They scale up. The exact same logic, habit loops, keystone habits, it can reshape entire companies, even entire societies.
Take the story of Alcoa, the huge aluminum company. When Paul O'Neill took over as CEO, Wall Street was expecting him to talk about profits, but he didn't. He focused on one single keystone habit, worker safety. His goal was 0 injuries. Now, to make that happen, the entire company had to change from the ground up. Communication systems had to be rebuilt, manufacturing processes had to be redesigned. It changed everything. That one focus on safety completely transformed the business.
You see, in a lot of big organizations, the daily routines, they're not always just about getting work done efficiently. A lot of the time, they're actually unspoken truces, these delicate agreements that keep the peace between different departments or powerful executives. They create stability, sure, but they can also make a company incredibly resistant to change, even when it's desperately needed.
So, what does it take to break these super-entrenched corporate habits? Well, often, it takes a crisis, a major failure, a near disaster, something that creates a huge sense of urgency. That's when the old truces and routines suddenly seem obsolete, and it gives a leader the perfect opportunity to step in and make real fundamental changes that actually stick.
Okay, so we've gone from the tiny loops inside our brains all the way up to the habits of massive corporations. But now, let's bring it all back home. Let's bring it back to the most important person in this equation, you.
After hearing all this, it leads to a pretty massive question. If almost half of our lives are run by these automatic loops we don't even think about, are we just along for the ride? Are our habits just our destiny?
And the answer, thankfully, is a definitive no. Habits are not destiny. Once you understand the mechanism, once you can see the cue, the routine, and the reward for what they are, you're no longer a slave to the system. You have the power. Habits are a choice that at some point you started making, and that means you can always, always choose to make a new one.
In the end, it really all starts with belief. The famous psychologist William James once wrote that the will to believe is the most important ingredient in creating belief in change. You now understand the code. You have the blueprint. The only question left is, what are you going to build with it?